have to make a decision now. And that decision is that that is a racist strike, and no communist teacher is about to obey that kind of a strike. See, these are the kinds of revolutionary practices which we have to deal with. So it's never easy to be a communist. And one who would ever think in terms of ease is already, in my opinion, worrying too much about his own comfort rather than being a communist.
Yes, my shit right here. So let's my shit right here. Welcome back to another episode of Road to William. Today we got a video on Charlene Mitchell.
In this election year, most Americans have been exposed to the positions of the three major presidential candidates, but there are other candidates for the presidency whose names and ideas may not be as well known, but who nonetheless speak to and for segments of American voters. In this year of profound political division and passion, it's more important than ever that the voices of these candidates be brought to the voting public. Today, NET has invited 6 presidential candidates whose names appear on the ballot of one or more states to give their views on the major issues of the day. Our candidates are, in order, Mr. E. Harold Munn, Sr., the Associate Dean of Hillsdale College in Michigan, the presidential candidate of the 99-year-old Prohibition Party. Mr. Henning A. Blomain, a machine assembler from Cambridge, Massachusetts, the Socialist Labor Party's candidate for the presidency. For the first time in 28 years, the Communist Party is running a candidate for president. Though only on the ballot in 2 states, Mrs. Charlene Mitchell campaigns across the country for her party. The opening statement for the candidate of the Communist Party, Mrs. Charlene Mitchell.
Yes, as you've said, this is the first time in 28 years that we have had a presidential candidate. But that does not take away from the seriousness of our campaign. We are indeed very serious about it, because it is very clear to us that of the so-called major candidates, that there is not very much difference when it comes to the issues that face the American people. And the only clear alternative that American people have today in the electoral process and facing up to and answering issues is that alternative to the left. We too feel that it is impossible for capitalism to answer the needs of the American people. But there are immediate needs that the American people have, and unless we begin to struggle for those immediate needs, it will become impossible for people to see the need for the changing of this system to one of socialism, whereby man can live in a more just and humane way. Thank you.
The candidate of the Prohibition Party, Mr. Munn.
The Prohibition Party is an old-line political party, which, as you mentioned earlier, was started 99 years ago. Next year,
a minister's not. We don't care who he is. That's what the government's been after so much about. It's a lot of these here boys, you know, that's been staying out of the draft because they get a 4D deferment. But we're not out to do that. But we'll give anybody a minister. We believe that everybody's a minister. We don't believe that this. We say the only difference between any human being is his education or his knowledge. That's the only difference. Race is not a difference, and nothing is a difference. Only the knowledge that he possesses is the only thing that separates 2 human beings.
Mrs. Mitchell, the candidate of the Communist Party, is it fair to say that the Communist Party in this country would have got a great deal more support than it did back in the 30s and 40s when it was last on the ballot if it had not been for a widespread feeling, which you might well challenge, that the party was a creature, an instrument of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union?
Oh, I think that there was such a widespread feeling that this was true. I don't think it ever was true. But the acceptance of the Communist Party by the American people has not to do with whether or not they felt we were tied to another country, or more specifically to the Soviet Union. It has had to do with the repressive legislation by the United States government on the Communist Party, unlike on any other political party in the history of this country.
But the bulk of that legislation came during and after what you might call the McCarthy period, back in the 30s and 40s.
In 1946.
Yeah, but back in the 30s and 40s, when you were on the ballot, quite a few intellectuals drew away, or went in, sometimes came out of the CP on this ground of domination by the Soviet Union. Now, is it not true that the American Communist Party, throughout the 30s and 40s, whenever anything was written or said about the Stalinist excesses and terror, denied it, only to live to see Khrushchev himself confirm it at the 20th Party Congress of the Soviet Party?
I think you might say that there's a lot of truth in that. But I don't think it's the important thing, because that is not why people did not come into the Communist Party later, because those are the years when the Communist Party was the biggest. That was the time when we had 100,000 members in the Communist Party up until the time of World War II. Our membership began to decrease at the time of the Cold War with the repressive measures.
Are those repressive measures now waning? Do you think?
Yes, they are not just waning, they are being defeated time after time. And on this, I would have to agree very much with what Mr. Halstead said, that people win victories. And one of the victories that people have been winning is the victory over McCarthyism. Now, there's a certain aim toward reestablishing what McCarthyism stands for in this country. And I think the Wallace candidacy is part and parcel of all of that. But by all means, what we are going through today is a process of winning certain victories. We lose some also. And I don't think people can stand aloof from the losses that people have been stacking.
Do you find, as a communist leader, that you have access to forums and to the news media more than communists would have had 10, 15 years ago?
Yes, again, because of the same kind of repressive legislation. It was impossible, for example, up until very lately, for a communist to speak on many university campuses. And what Mr. Cleaver is facing today, and I gather the reason that he is not here, is part of what we went through for years. It was impossible for a communist to speak or teach on any campus in the United States.
Well, presumably it was difficult at one time for a known communist to get a job or an apartment. Is that eased up? Is it easier to be a communist in the United States now than it was 15 years ago?
Well, that depends on your position of being a communist. It's never easy to be a communist. It's never easy to be a revolutionary. To be a revolutionary means you have to have a certain kind of dedication to a movement, to a principle, which says, first of all, that you want to overturn a capitalist system. Now, that does not take place with some ease or comfort. That takes place because you know that you have to go out there every day and organize, that you have to mobilize people in that process. You have to talk to people when you believe very fundamentally in trade union policies where they develop the rights of working people. But when those trade union policies deny the rights of people, like what is happening with UFT in New York, then you've got all kinds of problems that you have to deal with. Here is a racist strike, so that regardless as to whether or not you could have been a teacher or you were a teacher, an open communist, you have to make a decision now. And that decision is that is a racist strike, and no communist teacher is about to obey that kind of a strike. See, these are the kinds of revolutionary practices which we have to deal with. So it's never easy to be a communist. And one who would ever think in terms of ease is already, in my opinion, worrying too much about his own comfort rather than being a communist.
Well, may we go into the party's relationship, if any, with the international communist movement? Is there anything, for instance, any subject on which you disagree with the current views or policies of the Soviet Communist Party or Soviet government?
Well, there have been a number of debates that have been going on in the world communist movement now for many years. And on some, I have disagreements. I don't think to voice my agreements or disagreements to either you or this audience is going to give us enough time for me to even clarify them. So rather than say to you where I have disagreements and without having the time to clarify it, I think would only confuse people.
Let me put it another way, Mrs. Mitchell. Back in the 1930s and 40s, if an American communist leader disagreed with the current views of the Soviet Communist Party, he was quickly denounced from Moscow and usually apologized and recanted. Could you, as a Communist Party candidate for President of the United States, now disagree with the Soviet party or government on an issue and retain your position?
Well, again, let me say this. I am running for President of the United States. I do not keep up daily. I can't with what happens in the Soviet Union or the rest of the socialist world. Any question that you ask me, I am bound and determined to answer your question where it relates to United States politics and where I stand. Now, whether that is going to be in agreement with what somebody in the Soviet Union might say, I don't know.
You must have been.
How would I know?
May I ask you how you feel about the relationship between the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia, the presence of the troops from the other socialist countries in Czechoslovakia? Are you for it or against it?
My party has taken a position that it was regrettable but necessary. But let me say something here. You see, you talk about this monolith and so on. There's such disagreement within the world communist movement on Czechoslovakia that you could, it's very difficult to even decide where one party is.
But precisely, this is the new thing, surely. Surely, 20 years ago, there would have been no difference. The party would have been set.
But let me ask you a question. Is American imperialism less or more satisfied with that? And do you think that's going to make American imperialism want to accept Charlene Mitchell as a major candidate within the United States? Czechoslovakia, what happens in Czechoslovakia is not going to determine that. What's going to determine whether or not Charlene Mitchell is going to be a major candidate is when people realize that whatever the differences are within the world communist movement, that socialism provides the way to answer these problems. American capitalism does not provide that way.
All right, let's come back to this country. Are you in favor of a coalition of the left, of a popular front, so to speak, as Mr. Halstead said he was?
He did not say popular front. That's right. As he has said, we have worked together on some things, and where we have agreement, I have no difficulty in working with any of the parties on the left. But where we have basic and principled disagreements, it seems to me that it would do the left a disservice to have unity just for the purpose of unity. I would hope that we would clarify some of those issues. Most basically, those issues would be how we see the struggle for Black liberation, for example. Because I do not just see the necessity for Black control of the Black communities only. I see working as well within that the possibilities and the necessity for Black people to be on all policy-making bodies of all instruments in this country, instruments of government. So I don't know how this proceeds. I am for a left that says that the end of racism is part and parcel of the beginning of a revolutionary movement in this country. It can't be done without it.
Some of the leaders of the student movements around the country, the latter-day militants, have been heard to describe the Communist Party as middle-aged and bourgeois and dull. I can see that you're none of those things, but do you meet that criticism when you talk to them, and how do you answer it?
Well, at first I did. And then as we begin to discuss, of course, they begin to see that this is not the case. The problem is that there is developing, and I welcome it, a whole new left movement in this country today among young people. And just as I was in 1946 when I joined the Communist Party, and I looked around and I thought everybody was much older than I was 16. Well, of course, any revolutionary, who's gone through a siege is older than I. But also I began to learn that many of these people had learned through mistakes, through trial and error, but through doing, that they had established that they were a revolutionary party. And I think that many of the young people today are beginning to establish that kind of fact in their own mind. That regardless as to our age, we are a revolutionary party.
And Mr. Munn, as your party approaches its centennial, it does not seem to have won the issue for which its name implies it exists. In fact, since the end of federal prohibition.
And when we do away with it, well, we will then set up a new system, because there's no use in trying to set up a new system as long as the old system dominates. We have to fight the old system, and once it get hit out of the way, then we can bring forth something new. And I certainly appreciate being on this program. Thank you very much.
Now the closing statement from Mrs. Charlene Mitchell, the presidential candidate of the Communist Party.
Yes. Although our campaign is not one just to pile up votes, we do consider the electoral process to be an extremely important thing. And here in California, aside from the candidates that are here present, I am very sorry that Mr. Cleaver could not come. because I think that in Mr. Cleaver's candidacy is that kind of independent alignment on the left that is beginning to take place. And I do not want to in any way say that my candidacy is going to be in contradiction to his, especially when it comes to the issues about which we are both so very much concerned. That is the ending of racism in this country and the ending of the war in Vietnam. Now, I want to say further, the Communist Party is a revolutionary party, and we believe that it is impossible, so long as man is exploited in the position of being exploited by another man, that it is really impossible to have a humane system in which to live. However, we feel that it is absolutely impossible to create a revolutionary movement in this country, a revolutionary movement that will overturn the capitalist system. Once that capitalist system has been overturned, the possibilities then for absolute ending of racism, of the ending of the possibility even for war, and once you are able to eliminate those two evils, then I think that we will have the possibility of the freest and most democratic form of government. But I also would like to point out that when people talk about income tax, when people talk about all of these questions, I am for the ending of an income tax on people who earn less than $10,000 a year. I am for an increase on the income tax of all of the millionaires in this country. I think this country has to be turned over to its people and not to the minority.
That was a good video to show. That was like a more personable presidential debate. They're all sitting down at the table, still getting their points across. And now they do it. Everybody's standing up. Things change, you know. But what I liked about what I liked about Charlene being there at the table is not only was she representing for Black people, she was representing for a party that a lot of people forgot about at that time, right? But just because you don't see somebody doesn't mean they're not doing the work. What she brought up, she was a Black woman. She still decided to run, and even though they weren't asking her direct, how is this going to affect the Black community type of questions, or what are you going to do for the Black community, she made sure with each answer it favored not only for her party but her people. And for basically, she's, if you put the party aside and whatnot and you just focus on what she was striving for, what she's in the streets hearing, seeing people go through, she always brought it home. She always brought it back home, and that's what I like. I thought it was good to show this video because we got a Black woman running for president, and people feel different ways about her, not just her being a woman, but of color and what she stood for in the Biden administration and all that. So we're going to be uncovering all that soon and whatnot, but I just wanted to start a conversation on as we're getting closer to the election and what that means for not just voting, but what are we going to look like the next 4 years from here on out. And it's a toss up. It's a toss up in the air. No one trusts either party, either one. You know, and like I said in one of my videos, you know, they not really Cornel West. They kind of like not really caring about him. They like he just a fly on the wall. Basically, is how people are making it seem. But like I said, if he just joins in and they, you know, make your party stronger, I don't know. I don't know. You're gonna have to collaborate, in my opinion, to grow. And so, but beyond that, I thought it was a good video to spark up more conversation. I always like going back because there was this one comment, someone was said something around the lines of like, what is this video? It was on my Dr. John Clark Henrik. It was on my Dr. John Henrik Clark video. And someone was like, well, what's the point of, you know, bringing these videos up? What's the point of the, you know? Two, for me, I do a lot of throwbacks because they're saying the same shit. We're still going through the same shit they did. But how even at a time where they didn't have all the resources and whatnot we have today, how did they navigate? How did they get from that time to here we are? There had to have been some positive changes that they put in. It was a reason they were getting interviewed. It was a reason that they was getting a spotlight on them. And that showed for Charlene Mitchell, like that was 1968, like, and so, but she was still out there fighting. So it's like we have no excuse to not fight.
I think our vote will probably be small for many reasons. One, that we will not be on the ballot in many states because of the election laws, which, for one reason or another, have anti-communist laws where communists cannot get on the ballot. And in very many states, for example, in California, where you have to have such tremendous numbers of signatures even to get on the ballot. And it will of necessity be a write-in. Now, the question is whether all of the write-in votes will be counted. That will be a big question. But I think that whether or not at this first time in 28 years around, we achieve a great number of votes will not be the big answer as to whether or not it will be a successful campaign.
What will be?
Whether or not communists will be able to present to the American people their views and their platforms in a way that the American people can begin to understand what communists see as some of the solutions to the problems in our country.
Well, I think that one thing is very clear. The way in which they were attacked in Los Angeles by the police with this massive violence has to be challenged, has to be attacked. And we identify completely with the campaign against police repression in that respect, because we know that we can also be victims of the same kind of attack. And so, while of course, we've always made it clear that we believe that the revolution is going to come through utilizing different strategy, through organizing masses of people, and not through the kinds of things that the SLA was committed to do. Nevertheless, we have to, challenge that police repression of which they were victims.
Every form, North Carolina represents a microcosm in repression and in racism. And we feel that it is in that state that it is possible to set up an actual police state and to make that a real model of the New South and therefore a model for the rest of the country. For example, there are 33 prisoners on death row in North Carolina at the moment. 26 of them are Black, one is Indian. That's almost 46% of the people on death row throughout the country. If they are allowed to carry out the North Carolina Supreme Court's decision to reinstitute the death penalty, then the United States Supreme Court will be in a position to make that the law of the land. And then in the state of California, the capital punishment will be able to be carried out here as well.
The problem appears to be that there's no organization. There's no way to make that interest and that concern felt and seen. And I think that at this particular historical moment in our country, we have to be very much concerned with building organizational forms. If we don't, we may very well be facing an era of extreme repression, an era of intensified racism. And I think that we are beginning to see the beginnings of that now. And the reason for that is that with the ruling class in such a condition now, with the president, the person who tries to be president under the kind of justified attack, with the whole administration crumbling, they're going to try to prevent the development of any kind of a united multinational movement among the people in this country. And racism is the way you prevent that. Repression is the way you prevent that.
Somewhat embarrassed considering to Charlene Mitchell. But I'd like to really thank the organizers of this gathering. And it is, again, a real honor to participate in this special tribute to Charlene Mitchell. Hi, Charlene. You know, earlier today, I was talking about the erasures of people from the historical record, people who don't manage to attain the status of heroic individual, people who truly believe in justice and equality and peace and socialism should not actually really care whether their contributions are individually noted. And Charlene Mitchell is a leader who has transformed people's lives all over the country and literally all over the world. She has been out front, and she's also done that invisible organizing work and has been totally satisfied to see the fruits of her labor unfold as they do, without necessarily being singled out for her accomplishments. And that's, I think, precisely why we recognize her today. Thank you, Charlotte. I don't think I have ever known anyone as consistent in her values, as collective in her outlook on life, as firm in her trajectory as a freedom fighter. We can talk about Charlene Mitchell at age 13 and her first political activity. She joined the American Youth for Democracy in 1943. And I think you actually mentioned the protests work, the protests activities outside of the Windsor Theater in Chicago. Or we could fast forward and talk about Charlene Mitchell representing the Communist Party in the international arena, developing ties with leaders of national liberation movements in Africa during the 1960s and 70s, or organizing and administrating the campaign to free me when I was in jail from 1970 to 1972, creating one of the most impressive mass international campaigns of the 20th century. And I should say that, you know, people often ask me whether I'm troubled by the failure to recognize me as in history books. You know, the high school students who were here, but I don't know if they're still here. And I say no. I could really care less whether anybody knows me or my name. But what I do think is important is to retain some historical memory of that campaign for which Charlene was so instrumental. The fact that we did in 1972, or they did. I was in jail. I didn't really do too much of anything except write statements here and there and hope. But the fact that it was possible to bring so many different people together from so many different walks of life, students and workers and welfare rights activists and church people and sorority people and all that. I mean, it was just absolutely incredible. And we stood up to Ronald Reagan and we stood up to Richard Nixon. We said no, and we prevailed. Now that was amazing. That was amazing. And I think that if anyone should be remembered in the history books, it should be Charlene for that work. Now, last summer, I was in Cuba with Charlene as she received rehabilitative treatment for the stroke that she suffered in the summer of 2007. And I was totally impressed by the sense of community she had created in that rehabilitation center. And the first time I went, everybody was saying, hi, Charlene, how are you doing? And I mean, literally everybody knew her. And there were people there from all over the world. And I was impressed. I said, at first I thought that when they said that Charlene was their hero, because many of them said, Charlene is our hero here. And I thought that they were referring to her political history. But then I asked, well, how could all of those people know about it? And it turned out that they were referring to her strength, her courage in doing the very difficult rehabilitative exercises, often 7 hours a day. Many of the people who had suffered neurological damage and were relearning how to walk or how to use their arms, and they looked to Charlene for inspiration. And every day, Charlene walked the treadmill and did the Stairmaster and the stationary bike. And I mean, it was amazing to witness. Charlene is our inspiration. We often tend to think about the history of our marginalized communities as the history of firsts. And I think that's kind of problematic because sometimes the first is not necessarily the most progressive. The first woman, the first Black person, the first whatever. But Charlene was the first Black woman to run for the office of President of the United States of America on the Communist Party ticket in 1968. That was a little over 40 years ago. And that was a major first. And I should say that when we received the news that Barack Obama had been elected president, the first thing I thought of doing was to call Charlene. And I did. I called her and I congratulated her. Exactly 4 decades after she ran for president, I said, Charlene, congratulations, you won. Many people whose names we shall never know. And so I think it's important for us to claim that as our victory. Now, what the man himself is poised to do is quite another story. And I think Charlene tells us that we should be poised to continue exactly the same kinds of struggles to place the pressure on the office of the presidency so that we can indeed move forward. By the time Charlene ran for president, she had been a member of the Communist Party for many years. She joined the Communist Party when she was 16. 16. And I was looking through some of the interviews she's done over the last period, and I found something that I don't know. Maybe maybe I'm the only one who gets it, but I want to share it with you. She was describing her experience at the Abraham Lincoln School, a school where she studied Marxism, and so she read parts of Capital, and she said that in the interview she said, "Well, initially I thought of these ideas as being." I thought of them a little too simplistically. She said, for example, the whole idea of surplus value and how profit is made. I took what were meant as illustrations of surplus value and profit to be actual facts.
Thanks for tuning in with another episode of Road to William. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Comment, share, do all that good stuff. And I'll see y'all next time.